There are people who wake up one morning and decide to destroy their marriage. But they are rare. Most people who cross a relationship boundary don't begin with the intention of cheating. They begin with a conversation. A conversation that felt harmless. A conversation with someone who listened. Someone who noticed that they were tired. Someone who remembered something their spouse had forgotten. Someone who said, "You deserve to be happy." And little by little, something changed. Not in one dramatic moment. Not because they stopped loving their husband or wife overnight. But because they started giving a part of their emotional life to someone outside the marriage. And that's the story we're going to talk about today. Not a Bible story. Not a made-up romance. But a situation that happens in real relationships every day. The question isn't simply, why did they cheat? The deeper question is, how does an ordinary person slowly become capable of doing something they once promised they would never do? Let's imagine a married couple named Michael and Rachel. They had been married for 8 years. They weren't constantly fighting. They weren't miserable. They had jobs. They paid their bills. They visited family. They laughed sometimes. From the outside, their marriage looked normal. But inside the relationship, something had slowly changed. Michael had become absorbed in work. Rachel had become exhausted from balancing her job, the house, and their children. Neither of them was intentionally cruel. They were simply tired. When Michael came home, Rachel wanted to talk about her day. Michael wanted silence. When Rachel reached for emotional connection, Michael often answered with practical solutions instead of listening. When Michael wanted affection, Rachel often felt too emotionally drained to give it. Neither one believed the other was a bad person. But both quietly began to feel alone. And loneliness inside a marriage can be especially confusing. Because you don't think you're allowed to feel lonely. After all, you're married. Someone is sleeping beside you. Someone knows your history. Someone is supposed to love you. Yet somehow, you still feel unseen. Rachel worked with a man named Adam. He wasn't trying to steal her away. At least not at first. He simply noticed things. One afternoon, Rachel looked exhausted. Adam asked, "Long day?" Rachel laughed and said, "You have no idea." They talked for 10 minutes. The next week, they talked again. Then they began eating lunch together with other coworkers. Then one day, Rachel mentioned something about her marriage. Nothing dramatic. Just frustration. Adam listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell her what she should do. He simply listened. And Rachel left that conversation feeling lighter. That night, Michael asked how her day was. Rachel said, "Fine." She didn't tell him about the conversation. Not because she was hiding anything. At least, that's what she told herself. She just didn't think it mattered. But something had changed. For the first time in months, she felt understood. A few weeks passed. Rachel began looking forward to seeing Adam. She noticed when he wasn't at work. She smiled when his name appeared on her phone. She told herself they were just friends. And maybe at that point they were. But friendship can become emotionally complicated when it starts replacing intimacy that should be addressed within a relationship. Rachel started telling Adam things she no longer told Michael. Her fears. Her frustrations. Her dreams. The things that hurt her. Adam became the first person she wanted to talk to when something happened. And that's when the relationship had already changed. Nothing physical had happened. There had been no kiss. No hotel room. No dramatic confession. But Rachel had begun sharing her emotional world with someone else while keeping Michael outside of it. This is one of the hardest truths about relationships. People often imagine betrayal begins with sex. Sometimes it does. But often it begins much earlier. It begins when someone feels invisible. When they stop feeling appreciated. When they stop feeling emotionally safe. When they stop believing their partner is interested in their inner world. That doesn't excuse betrayal. Feeling lonely doesn't give anyone permission to deceive their spouse. But if we want to understand relationships honestly, we have to understand how people get there. Because if all we say is, cheaters are bad people, we may miss the warning signs that healthy couples need to notice long before a crisis develops. One evening, Michael noticed Rachel smiling at her phone. He asked, "Who's that?" Rachel immediately turned the screen away. "Just someone from work." Michael didn't say anything, but he noticed. The next day, he noticed again. Then he noticed Rachel taking her phone into another room. Suddenly, the marriage felt different. Michael didn't know what was happening, but secrecy had entered the relationship. And secrecy changes the emotional atmosphere of a marriage. Even before anyone has proof of anything, trust begins to feel uncertain. One afternoon, Adam sent Rachel a message. "Thinking about our conversation yesterday. I hope you're okay." Rachel read it several times. There was nothing obviously inappropriate, but she knew Michael probably wouldn't feel comfortable reading it. She hesitated. Then she deleted the message. That was the first clear boundary she crossed. Not because the message was terrible, but because she had decided it belonged in a private part of her life that she didn't want her husband to see. This is how many relationship boundaries are crossed. Not all at once. One small secret. Then another. Then another. And eventually, the person begins protecting the outside relationship instead of protecting the marriage. It's easy to focus only on Rachel. But Michael had his own story. For months, he had felt rejected. Whenever he tried to be physically affectionate, Rachel seemed distant. He assumed she wasn't attracted to him anymore. Instead of talking about it honestly, he withdrew. He spent more time at work. He stopped asking questions. He stopped initiating conversations. He told himself, "She doesn't care anyway." But Rachel interpreted his silence differently. She thought, "He doesn't notice me." Both people were hurting. Both were making assumptions. And neither was telling the truth about what they actually felt. This is one of the most common patterns in struggling marriages. One person withdraws because they feel rejected. The other feels rejected because the first person withdrew. Then both use the other's behavior as proof that love has disappeared. This is where attraction becomes complicated. Rachel wasn't necessarily looking for another relationship. But Adam made her feel attractive again. He noticed her. He remembered things she said. He paid attention. Sometimes attraction isn't only about appearance. Sometimes it's about how another person makes us feel about ourselves. And that's dangerous if we don't understand it. Because we may think we're falling in love with them when we're actually becoming attached to the feeling of being seen. That doesn't mean the feelings aren't real. They are. But real feelings still need to be understood before they become life-changing decisions. This isn't a story from the Bible, but the situation connects with something Jesus taught. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus talks about adultery and takes the conversation beyond outward actions. He asks people to pay attention to what is happening in the heart. The point isn't that noticing another person is attractive automatically makes someone a bad person. Human beings notice beauty. They experience attraction. The deeper question is what happens after that. Do we feed the attraction? Do we create secrecy? Do we begin imagining another life? Do we allow desire to become something that changes the way we treat our spouse? Jesus' teaching asks us to examine the heart before the behavior becomes destructive. That principle is incredibly relevant today. One Friday, Rachel and Adam stayed late at work. Most people had gone home. They were talking. The conversation became personal. Adam said, "Sometimes I wonder if we'd met at a different time." Rachel felt her heart race. For a moment, she imagined what life might be like with him. Then she thought about Michael, their children, their home, the life they had built. And suddenly she understood something. She hadn't been looking for Adam. She had been looking for the feeling she used to have inside her marriage. Adam had simply become the person associated with that feeling. That realization didn't solve everything, but it changed the question. Instead of asking, "Do I love Adam?" she began asking, "Why have I stopped feeling alive in my own marriage?" That weekend, Rachel sat down with Michael. Not to accuse him. Not to confess every detail dramatically. But to tell the truth about the relationship. She said, "I've been feeling lonely for a long time, and instead of telling you, I've been shutting down." Michael was quiet. Then he said something Rachel hadn't expected. "I thought you stopped wanting me." For the first time in months, neither of them defended themselves. They listened. The conversation wasn't magical. Years of distance didn't disappear in one night. But something important happened. They stopped fighting the symptoms and started talking about the wound. This is where many movies lie to us. Real relationship repair isn't one emotional speech followed by romantic music. It's uncomfortable conversations. It's admitting where you were wrong. It's listening without immediately defending yourself. It's changing habits. It's rebuilding trust. It's setting boundaries. It's making time for each other. Sometimes it's counseling. Sometimes it's medical help. Sometimes it's learning how to communicate differently. And sometimes, despite everyone's efforts, a relationship may still not survive. But healthy people don't confuse repair with pretending nothing happened. Repair means facing reality honestly. If you're married and you've started feeling emotionally close to someone else, don't wait until the relationship becomes impossible to stop. Ask yourself, why am I telling this person things I no longer tell my spouse? Why am I hiding messages? Why am I looking forward to this person's attention so much? What need am I trying to meet? Am I willing to address that need honestly within my relationship? The earlier you ask these questions, the more choices you still have. And if you're the person who discovers your spouse has become emotionally involved with someone else, your pain is real. You don't have to minimize it. You don't have to immediately forgive. You don't have to immediately leave. You need time to understand what happened. You need honesty. You need boundaries. You need to know whether your partner is genuinely willing to rebuild trust. Forgiveness, if it comes, is a process. And reconciliation requires more than apologies. It requires changed behavior. The story of Michael and Rachel teaches something important. Attraction says, "I feel alive around you." Loneliness says, "Please don't leave me alone." Validation says, "Make me feel valuable." Attachment says, "I don't know who I am without you." But mature love says, "I care about your good, even when my feelings are complicated." Attraction is powerful, but attraction alone cannot build a marriage. Sex can create closeness, but sex alone cannot repair emotional wounds. Feelings matter, but feelings need wisdom. Most relationships don't collapse because one person suddenly became evil. They often begin to weaken much earlier. When conversations become shorter. When appreciation disappears. When resentment isn't discussed. When affection becomes conditional. When loneliness is hidden. And when people begin looking outside the relationship for what they're afraid to ask for inside it. The lesson isn't that every lonely spouse will cheat. They won't. And the lesson isn't that every marriage can be saved. Some relationships are unhealthy and need firm boundaries or separation. The lesson is that the heart usually moves before the feet do. By the time someone crosses a physical boundary, there have often been dozens of smaller choices that came first. That's why Jesus' teaching about the heart is so challenging. He asks us to pay attention to the direction we're moving before our decisions become our character. Tonight, don't just ask yourself, would I ever cheat? Ask yourself something more honest. Am I protecting the relationships I say I value? Am I telling the truth? Am I addressing loneliness before it becomes secrecy? Am I choosing boundaries before temptation becomes a crisis? Because faithfulness isn't only the decision you make in one dramatic moment. It's often the result of hundreds of small decisions made long before that moment ever arrives. And perhaps that's the real lesson about love, sex, attraction, and marriage. A relationship is rarely protected by one grand promise. It's protected every day by honesty, attention, self-control, compassion, and the courage to talk about the things we'd rather avoid. That's where love becomes more than a feeling. That's where attraction becomes something you understand rather than something that controls you. And that's where wisdom begins.